when the seed becomes mature, the fruit also changes color, changes flavor, changes texture. And so that color, suddenly you have a ripe red fruit or yellow or orange fruit that's distinctive on the plant, calling everybody in the neighborhood to come and check it out. And the flesh is sweeter and tastes good and makes you want to eat it. So all these things are visual indicators that the seed is ready to be harvested. Welcome to episode 74 of the Seed Farmer Podcast, the podcast where I want you to harvest seeds from some of the vegetables and flowers growing in your farm or garden, and then to plant that seed out to grow delicious vegetables and beautiful flowers. If you enjoy the Seed Farmer Podcast and find it to be a good resource that helps you improve your seed work and farming, please support the show at spreadsheet.farm/supportpodcast. I'm your host, Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tourne-Sol Cooperative Farm and author of The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seeds. Today's minisode is about how to know whether it's time to harvest your seeds. And before we get into that, a little bit of news, which might actually be the intro to set the scene, because it's about harvesting seeds on the farm. So we just brought in our first turnip seed harvest. So these were Tokyo Market turnips that we planted in the field last fall, or sown in the field last fall, maybe sometime in mid-July. And we harvested in October. We overwintered in the cold room. And then in the spring, we took them out, potted them up in little 3-inch pots, let them break dormancy in our nursery, and then we planted them out. I think it was mid-April in our greenhouse, and they went to flower. And as I'm recording this, which is at the end of June, last week, so I guess I'm talking about the third week of June, if you're keeping track of the timeline, but the third week of June, the plants were covered in pods, and a lot of them were still green, but I just noticed they were starting to turn yellow at a pretty quick rate, and a few plants were even more yellow than that. And what I did is I went and got a couple pieces of landscape fabric, and I put them on the ground in the greenhouse, kind of strategically so they're not squishing any plants. And then I pulled up the turnips one by one from the root, and I put the plant part on the tarp, and I left the root hanging over with the dirt so that no dirt gets onto the tarp, because dirt is a pain to get out of seeds sometimes, and it's just easier to not add it than to remove it later. So I had, a big piece of landscape fabric with, the turnip pods in the middle and the roots hanging off both sides. And so I pulled up all the turnips that way and put them down. Now, normally I would be bringing them into our nursery greenhouse to, harvest them and then bring them to the nursery greenhouse and spread them out this way. But we're about to change the plastic on that greenhouse, and there will be a window, maybe a day or two, where there's no plastic. And if it rains during that point, I don't want these crops to get rained on. So I left them on the ground in the greenhouse where they grew, essentially in the same place where they grew. And we have a good sparrow population that is living there right now. And I was a little bit worried that as these seeds mature, the sparrows move in to the seed plants and eat them all. So I spread out screens over the plants. And when I say screens, we have a 100-foot-long roll of window screen. This is something that Emily purchased a couple years ago so that we always have some screen material on hand. And you can cut a piece off if you want to make a quick screen for window, obviously. But also, what we'll do with the screen sometimes is just cut a piece off and put it into a tulip flat or some other kind of container that has holes on it, but just by having the screen, it means that the seed doesn't go through, but there's still ventilation from all the holes and stuff on the side of the bin. And anyway, so we have a roll of 100-foot long screen, and I just unrolled most of it kind of over the turnips, kind of 2 passes to cover at least 80% of the material, to make it harder for birds to kind of come down and get that seed. So just a physical barrier, essentially. And I did this as opposed to putting row cover on it because this, I think, is a little bit more porous and more likely to let air through, because these pods are a bit on the green side. And if I was to cover something up too much, I don't want it to compost. So this is going to let some air through that. And so I did that, I guess, last week. This week, I checked maybe 2 days ago when I was at the farm, and the pods have completely dried down. So at this point, I could thresh that anytime. And hopefully that happens in the next 3 or 4 days. And by the time you're listening to this, I have threshed the turnips and maybe even winnowed them, and they're probably in a bucket somewhere with a good label on it. So that's where I'm hoping to be by the time you listen to this. And with that, why don't we get into today's minisode, which is about how to know when it's time to harvest a seed crop. The main way to know if a seed crop is ready to be harvested is to go and listen to your plants. Go and listen to your seed crop. See what it tells you. And plants give a lot of indicators to humans and other creatures when they have mature seed. Think about a tomato. When the fruit first sets, there's a green fruit with immature seed in it. Those seeds aren't viable. And that fruit is pretty bitter. And, it's edible, but most folks are not that interested in that green fruit, including creatures. But when the seed becomes mature, the fruit also changes color, changes flavor, changes texture. And so that color, suddenly you have a ripe red fruit or yellow or orange fruit that's distinctive on the plant, calling everybody in the neighborhood to come and check it out. And the flesh is sweeter and tastes good and makes you want to eat it. And once you eat it, it goes through your digestive tract, and then you can sow it somewhere else by biological methods. And I guess this is more seed-saving tips for birds and other animals. This is not necessarily the approach that we're practicing at the Seed Farmer podcast. Also, the fruit becomes more soft and tender, so just more pleasant to eat too, in addition to the flavor. So all these things are visual indicators that the seed is ready to be harvested. And you can use those hints for a lot of fruits. So peppers, for sure. If you think about melons or watermelons, the color changes a little bit, maybe not as much as a tomato or pepper, but there is some change there. But the taste is definitely visible, or not visible. The taste is tasteable, and there's definitely an olfactory sense that gets triggered. And maybe you don't smell it, but I know the raccoons everywhere smell it and come and check out all your melons. So this is definitely one thing when you're dealing with a new seed crop that you may not have grown before. Is there a color change like this? Does it taste better? That's one way that you might know that a crop is ready to harvest. Other crops that might seem similar are a little bit different. So something like cucumbers or zucchini that are fruit that you eat, they're actually, though they're probably tastier than if you leave them on the vine longer, they're actually the immature part of your plant. And the seed is not yet ready in there. You actually have to let it sit longer on the plant. Now, it will change color, and there is going to be a flavor change because it's going to start to, ferment a little bit. That's another visual indicator that the seeds are maturing as those fruits change. And you'll see the same thing with like eggplants, and they kind of get big and mushy. And I know we've talked about that in recent episodes, and let them get even mushier if you can. And then other crops like beans or brassica pods, maybe even okra pods, they start off a green pod, maybe a yellow pod or red, depending on the color of the vegetable. And as the seed matures, the pod starts to get brown and woody, maybe a leathery feeling. I guess I have to say woody and leathery because I've included okra with beans here, but they become dry and crisp. And that's another indicator that seed is ready. And in the case of something like beans or brassica seeds, if you touch the pod, it might even pop open, especially brassica seeds. So that's a visual indicator. There's a tactile indicator. One of the ways I'll check to see if a brassica seed lot is definitely ready for harvest is just by running my hand through it. And if I can hear the seed rain falling down, then I know that I should have harvested this before this moment. So those are all signs that your plants give you that it's time to go and harvest them. And so that's the visual signs in addition to other senses. Something you can also go and do is you can go and open that fruit and look to see if there's seed in it. And that's something that I struggled for a long time with cucumbers. Some cucumbers are really clear. They become, it's a green cucumber, and then when it becomes over mature, it turns like a bright yellow, and that's a sign that the seed is mature inside. But that's not true for all cucumbers. Some cucumbers just get big and green. And what Tom Stearns told me one point when we were looking at some cucumbers, and I was telling him this challenge, he said, just cut it open and look to see if there's seed inside. And that seemed pretty obvious. So, now with a cucumber, when I'm not sure, I'll cut it open to look and see if there's a seed inside. And by seed, like a fully mature seed. And that's true for all these crops, and cut flowers and other crops that you might grow to seed. Go and look to see if the seed is inside. And so that's another visual indicator. In addition to looking at the seed, you can take a seed and you can bite it, crush it with your teeth, maybe pinch it, and see what it looks like inside. And for a lot of seed, if you bite it and there's kind of like a milky fluid inside, the seed is not quite there yet. And if you bite it and it's kind of like fully starchy and white, maybe it's often white, maybe yellow, but inside, then there's a good chance it's ready at that point. So that's another thing that you can do to see if the seed is ready. And this is something I've been doing a lot with spinach lately, because some varieties of spinach, when they dry down, they become a nice tan, and you know that the seed is ready to harvest. But some of other varieties, and that seems to be the case with the population I'm working with right now, it's a mix of different varieties that have crossed up, the seeds kind of keeps green, and so it's hard for me to know visually if it's ready. And then suddenly I see there's a bunch of seed on the ground, and I'm disappointed because I didn't harvest the seed lot in time. So I've been biting the seed to see, is it still at that milky stage, or are they starting to be more ready for harvest? So these are all different ways that you can tell whether a seed is ready to harvest. And to be able to do that, you got to spend time with your seeds. And this is something that I keep saying. Spend time with your plants, spend time with your seeds. Pay attention to them. And this is especially true when it's a new crop. Go and look at it at least once a week, maybe a couple times a week, even a couple times a day if you feel like it. And you'll see as they're evolving, and you'll start to get ideas of when they're ready. And as you look at more and more plants, and especially over the years, this becomes more and more second nature. And so now when I go and look at a brassica seed field, even before I go up and touch it or anything, there's just a certain color of yellow or brown, or kind of where it's changing, where in sunlight I realize, oh, no, this is ready, and there's a kind of a color where I'm like, oh, it's probably good now, but I can let it hold on to. And these are things that happen just by developing that relationship with your crop, and especially with the varieties, because as I've already mentioned, with cucumbers and with seeds, different varieties can act differently one from the other. So you got to build up those relationships over time with crops and with varieties. Now that you have an idea when the seed crop is ready, there is one last part I wanted to slip into this episode, is when do you harvest it? In an ideal world, if you live in a part of the planet where it's a dry summer and you don't have many chances of rain, you might be able to leave your plants standing there until they're perfectly dry, and then when everything is perfect, you can knock it over onto, or if I say knock it over, maybe cut them with a pair of secateurs or with a Zenport harvest sickle or whatever tool you use, and then put them on a piece of landscape fabric or a bin to bring them in, or actually maybe thresh in the field. But where we are, we don't have that luxury. We can have rain at almost any moment. Usually there's a bit of a warning from the forecast, but I can have a seed lot that feels like it's a few days away from being perfect to harvest, and I know that there's rain coming in the forecast. And in that case, we'll try to harvest early. And so not all those visual indicators might be where I want them to be, But if I don't harvest at that point and we go into a few days of rain, I can ruin the seed lot, either by shattering it in the field or by just having a lot of humidity and making things either germinate in the field or rot in the field. And sometimes rain lasts a lot longer than you expect. So if there is some unpleasant weather coming my way, I will go in and harvest things early. And there's always a little bit of a risk with that. The closer it is to maturity, the better. But a lot of seed crops, if you harvest them early, as long as the seed has started, like is a full size and is starting to dry down, or at least has fully swollen up, after harvest, they will keep maturing and you can get a good germinating lot. Now, it's not true for every crop, but it's true for a lot of crops, and definitely with brassicas, with beans, and with others. I mean, even something like tomatoes, if it's starting to change color, you can harvest it and bring it in and let it keep changing till it's fully ripe, and the seed will still be really good. So that's one of the things, is making sure you harvest the seed before a wet weather event. You can do the cleaning later on, but getting it into a dry area to keep maturing is what you need to do. Now, I've just gone through harvesting a bit early so that you can beat the weather, but there's also the fact that for a lot of crops, they keep flowering over a period of time. Can be weeks, can even be like a month. And so the seed from each of those flowers is going to mature over a period of time. And that means that from the moment the first seed is ripe to the moment the last seed is ripe, it might take a full month. And over that month, the first seed is going to shatter. So there is probably no one moment for many crops where all the seed is ready at one time. If you're growing a smaller seed crop, you could go in and shake those individual plants that are ready, or the parts of the plants that are ready, as they mature. But the more plants that you have, the more crops that you have, the less practical that gets. And so, in our case, if we're growing an arugula or some other brassica crop, we look at the plants and choose a moment when about 3/4 of them are drying down or close to that stage, and we'll harvest the plants then. And that's going to give us the most seed for the most efficient work. And we won't get every last seed, but we're growing a lot of plants, so we'll still get a lot of seed. And some of the immature pods will produce some mature seed, and some of them will just dry up to little tiny seeds that get winnowed out. And that's part of the process, and that's one of the ways that you make it feasible to work on a market garden, by accepting that you're not going to get every last seed. And this brings us to the part of the podcast where I invite you to go out and go for a walk and go see your seed friends, your plant friends, and see how their flowers and pods are doing, and whether there's any seed on the way, and whether you need to go and maybe get a piece of landscape fabric or a bin and do a little harvesting. And that's another minisode of the Seed Farmer Podcast. I know there's a lot of crops out there, and I've kind of just given you some general guidance on this. If you have any questions about specific crops that you wish you knew when they were ready or not, send me an email or a DM. I'd love to hear about them, and I'll answer it sometime on a future episode. Thank you to Sophia Sedeltin for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at sophiasedeltin.com. Thank you to Molly Brisebois for editing this episode. And thank you so much for listening. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at seedgrowers.farm. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. You can also find out where to order a copy of my book, The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seed. And you can support the podcast at spreadsheet.farm/support-podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now's the time. You wouldn't want to miss the next episode. Until then, happy farming.